Sup Shredders, my name is Logan aka Spiderhands and welcome to an SP Reviews where today we're going to be checking out albums from Axe, Mike Flip, Nord1kone and Seize titled Life Cycles. And we'll switch over to here, we have ourselves the album on the screen there. Now, I'm actually re-recording this intro because I initially thought it was Nord1kone, but then I realized it was Nord1kone when I heard them say Nord1kone. So if you hear me say Nord1kone at any point in the review, please ignore it. I do eventually rectify that. We're going to listen through this album from start to finish. At least the first, we're going to listen to 5 tracks starting with Business of Life. I'm going to hear what we think. Let's go.
Earth, more growth, death. You want reproduction? We got that too. One life cycle to live. Experience it again and again.
Welcome to another exciting episode of Life Cycles.
Hey, you. Excuse me. Could I, Well, never mind. They're busy. They're all getting on with the business of life. Starting off small to growing up to producing the next generation. All living things have a life cycle.
Oh, incredible sound production.
As important as the last. Life cycles are as varied and diverse as life on Earth. Different groups of organisms all have different kinds of life cycles. These are the seeds of the also-mitra vine, a type of climbing plant.
Just a combination of different elements from the adverts, like the TV commercial kind of things we had going on, talking about like the life cycles and everything, and coming into more of a situation. We had the vocals panned across, trying to get the attention of the listener with the really smooth beat we had on the percussion there, and the woodwinds were like the saxophone or something like that. Oh no, we're switching to keys now.
Amazing gliding seeds. Seeds will grow, and the next generation is started. The life cycle starts again. Like every other living thing in nature, we humans have a life cycle too. We start out small, we grow, and we learn new skills which we can use to look after ourselves as adults, just like other living creatures. And we reproduce the next generation, so the life cycle can start all over again.
It's scintillating. It's such a great use of the 1 minute 36 here. We have basically an album where if you're not listened to any of these musicians before, you don't know what you're going into, but you can hear how well things are mixed and mastered. You can hear the vocals really clearly, the story. You understand how it relates to life cycles, the title of the album there, and you kind of get an impression of what the journey is going to be about. I don't think that's something that's particularly exclusive or niched. I think a lot of people can probably relate to the life cycle of a human being, and potentially we're going to be examining that within this record. I think the different instruments we had with the various bass parts, the keys, the drums, the synths, like any sort of like sax or kind of, brass elements we had in the intro parts, but also just the seamless transitions between the various types of voiceovers that we had, the different ambiances there. The wide variety of different vibes we had musically there was great, and it's really promising. We have Better Dazed for track number 2 featuring Elder Sensei.
Kicking lyrics the way you want to hear it.
To a funky drummer beat.
Great filtering there of the frequencies.
Time to get funky, 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 funky. Time to get funky. For years I've been into rap, writing funky rhymes to get my name on the map.
And the turntablism is I mean, there's just so much going on there with the way things flip around the stereo field there. The chopping of the vocals is decent as well. It kind of indicates, we talk about, Mike Flip's being a hip-hop producer based in the UK. Style stems from the classic boom-bap 90s era, started DJing in his mid-teens. We've got their own influences coming through here, as well as the best strengths of the other musicians associated with it. It's just it was almost making me feel nostalgic, and I'm not quite sure why.
Swinging and pushing dumb luck. Never gave a damn and had no plan for how to construct. My life was shambles, just handling all the pressure of a young man out on his own and facing rough weather. Remember when music was all I had to own? Since then, I devoted, but the roots have now been set in stone. I roam the California coast and hold the golden gates open for your challenges. On mics, my flows are known to break. But it took time to sharpen up skills I'm known to flex. Had to lose battles to figure out when it's complex. Strategies, evolution of a masterpiece. Started with the brushstroke, now wild styles are gathering. I travel back to when I thought it all would last forever. Appreciate the moments that I have with family all together. These nights are cherished, but you know I still got dues to pay. Nose to the grindstone, hoping for some better days.
Hook was instantiated at the beginning. Very cool in response with the sax melody there.
Since my start as a youth, 15 still a dream, doing songs in the booth. B-boy Instagram, took a chance on the mic. Learned this element, intelligent teachings in what I write. Further sight in my past at the time was a myth. Beginner's gift, developed talent and measured to spit. Fast forward now, to a few anthems galore. Made the deal, scored, now I'm independently raw. In it for more, 50 plus busting through doors. Crushing your whore, spicing with my swiper rapport. Steady grins, melodies big and pedal my biz. Professional grit, especially when my legibles fit. Pieces of puzzles, bigger than my life when I'm troubled. Mentally fried, I put my place in a bubble. Escapism, now living for me. Loved ones, family, good people that better be.
What I like about this is several things. We've got a clear verse for each vocalist here, and their voices are easily identifiable. You know, it's very simple to tell what's going on. It's kind of each individual musician's own version of their better days. The motif behind it is nice and pleasant, with the various kind of like major and minor seventh extensions there, kind of trying to smooth out any edginess with any sort of direct major or minor triads. And I think that bass line, that rolling bass line, bum 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 bum, kind of like modulating between those different root note starting places is cool dope as well. You know, it just allows for such a nice floor for everything else to exist upon. And it's powerful as well to just have the focus on the guitars and those little bits before the re-entry into the hook. They're just for a little bit of a break before things become big again. It's nice to have that mixture both in terms of the dynamic range. You just kind of, as a listener, you kind of get the signal that something's about to develop there without having to do like a filler or an extra transition forward. Like it's two chord progression. Very simple harmonically.
I take it back to 8 tracks and wax, cassette tapes and mad flavor dripping out my bass would grab. The people walking by the ear and get it moving. Electric slide when I'm grooving with my honey, lifted off the movement. Sound reverberates and elevates, I exhale. Blunts burn like candles, the vandal that's prone to set sail. My text trails, apex, respect them veiled. I do it for the music and will never set the fail. I catch wreck when battling in between sets. Let these MCs know I got the flow to leave them perplexed. Juggling rhythm and vision, my lyrics hit them. Knock them cold like Modelo's, I be cracking when I'm spitting. And when I'm done, I'm tapping nuts, cause I'm the humble type. Appreciate the energy your fans when I rock the mic. These nights are good, but I'll be grinding like my time is wage. Waiting for my moment, looking forward to the better days.
It's interesting. You get the impression that they have a sense of nostalgia for how things used to be. Like they talk about their old 8 tracks and everything like that being in the studio at 15. You could tell that they've had a history with the genre and with performing. That experience isn't just visible only within the stories that are being told. Clearly they're competent rappers. You know, the flow is tight. There's a really nice punchiness and charisma to the delivery of these lines from all, you know, musicians involved. I'm just wondering what we're going to do for the rest of the 1.5 minutes of this 5-minute track. What are we going to do with that real estate? Oh, and it's just a reiteration back upon that back motif. I mean, like, don't get me wrong, there are like those transitions with the drums. I meant to say there weren't transitions before, there are. It's just, they're trying to lower the intensity of it going between at the start of those chorus parts before them,
We blaze around and pace. Better days instead of missing family for a wage. Better days with skills supreme and dues are paid. Better days finally here because we pray. Better days where tracks we blaze around and pace. Better days instead of missing family for a wage. Better days where skills supreme and dues are paid. Better days finally here because we pray.
Finally here because we pray. So is it meant to sort of communicate if they continue to work and grind away at what they're doing, they're going to get to a place where they're happy and they pray for their life so that eventually it's going to become a thing?
Kicking lyrics the way you wanna hear it.
That I don't like. Yeah, it's fantastic. It's really great in regards to the production. Like, I don't really know what they could have done to necessarily improve this track. The flow on the different vocal parts is tight, as I mentioned before. It's easy to tell who is which and that there's a different musician on each bit going on. It seems very genuine and authentic, the delivery there. They're trying to sort of like not tell their story from a point of, I suppose they're sort of letting you know their history. And I think that that's something that, even if there's some artistic interpretation or some things, which I don't think there is, but it's still far better than trying to tell someone what to think as a listener. I think it was a great use of 5 minutes. It's a long track, but I think there was enough within the various verses in that interlude section at the end there to kind of flesh it out. And when there weren't stories being told or reiterations of the hook, like in the center and the other 3 bits, it's just simply fascinating with a wide variety of different instruments within the arrangement to keep you satisfied. They're not there all the time. They interact with one another, do call and responses there, stack well in the frequency spectrum, all that kind of stuff. It's well considered. And it's a really neutral, natural, kind of bouncy, happy kind of tone to it, which I think suits the stories. It suits the themes of the track well. We've got Underdog Vibe, track number 3 for us, 5 for the album.
Yeah. Nord1kone. Yeah. I stay up in between the
Nord1kone.
West, let my dialect progress from where I'm rooted. Showed and proven, it's the way to keep it moving. I look God in the eye when I begin this transmission. But the devil on my shoulder had another plan. So listen, it's a numbers game. And even though it don't always add up, you best to pray you put your luck. Somewhere in between we're stuck. Thinking of a master plan, no doubt escaping the physical through lyrical, spiritual affirmation. I'm a fiend for the mic, distributing ink well, riding high, feeling low as I compose these flows propel. Your mind stayed in motion as we levitate to beat. Show support for the homies, stay humble and don't seek trouble. But when it comes away, we stay ready, grips the mic, white knuckle, catch me in the verbal tussle in the cipher. I'm a sniper like the whole damn dubs bench. Metamorphosis has begun, San Francisco, we ain't done yet. This ain't nothing but the dope hip-hop, Nord1kone.
Okay, a little bit more low-key than the previous tracks.
Put your hands up high, keep it moving through the struggle. This that underdog vibe. This ain't nothing but the dope hip-hop, the Nord1kone won't stop. Strictly for the love and props like that. Everybody put your hands up high, keep it moving through the struggle. This that underdog. Close my eyes to the.
So sorry, I'll go back a little bit so we can hear the verse in full. Why is it that it's only on the left side with those repeater vocals or those chants? Is there meant to be more people coming in to sort of tell their stories and it fills it in like that? I'm unsure. It's less instrumentally or compositionally interesting than the previous track we listened to, Better Days, but nonetheless, I think that the smoothness to it, the low-key nature of those mid to low-end simmers there, it works well.
Keep it moving through the struggle. This that underdog. Close my eyes to the sunrise east as I dedicate these moments and represent sacrifice. Remember what we hold is golden. Take the time away from man, but they can never take the music echoing across the mighty golden gate. My rhyme producing now in bloom. The opportunities conclude exclusively. The righteous path I walk congruently, efficiently to school MCs. I break them down like grief weakens the knees. Mix the pain into the pain and how to brush with ecstasy. Philosophies I walk with these while burning trees to keep my steez. Quick-witted, my third eye sees. Lyrical monopolies. I offer these with no apology. And map it like cartography. See you point my way to navigate it like astrology. Enough for all of these rap cats and wannabes. Couldn't survive on skills, so they rely on technology. What I be bringing is authentic. Check the vibes. Playing Nord1kone arrives. Knock 'em cold like an icebreaker. This ain't nothing but the dope.
So this Nord1kone the entire time? Because I don't necessarily mind that. I mean, clearly he's proficient. He talked about the new generation or whatever, relying on technology, and he's relying on like his skill and his ability to sort of spit and stuff like that. I think it's definitely valid. You know, there is such thing as too much reliance on technology, and a lot of the hip hop and rap I review, sometimes people are like, yeah, no, I need that additional assistance to make it special. When arguably a lot of the old school kind of hip hop and rap and stuff like that sounded great because of how raw it was without that extra element. But there's pros and cons for both.
Like that. Everybody put your hands up high. Keep it moving through the struggle. This that underdog vibe. This ain't nothing but the dope hip hop. Nord1kone won't stop. Strictly for the love and props like that. Everybody put your hands up high. Keep it moving through the struggle. This that underdog vibe. Yo, it's the moon child. Wild like the California coastal. I'm smoking, getting vocal, putting MCs in the chokehold. My proposals breach the levee, shift the balance, tip the hourglass, and sweep the sands into the vessel. Drifting sea set free at last. Starfighter, exploring deep space at light speed. Knuckles up, swinging solar systems, open galaxies. Realities get shook, and Nord1kone will leave you token. Universally eclipsing with the microphone. I'm ripping, shifting, turbo, transmitting, system puppet jams. Hidden in the cuts of San Francisco with the blunts. Expand my vision, roll it up and burn with buddies. Break the mold like silly putty. Pull from records old and dusty. Fishing for the chops and busting. I'm entrusted with the keys I float to unlock the golden gates and let these MCs go up in the bay. We play for higher stakes. So don't mistake my kindness for respect. But how your leg will twist the plot into the split and burn it with the mic check. This ain't nothing but...
Yeah, okay. If I was to make any comment, I feel like we could potentially allow for more space. I know we're telling a story and there's a lot to say to people, and we're clearly good at what we do. I feel like you could potentially allow less of a constant and it's not meant in a way where I don't want them to rap. It's more like if there was more of a break between certain sentences, you would kind of find as a listener it's less sort of predictable, and you'd be in a position where you go, you know what I mean? Like, it can just be nice to have a bit of space. I don't know why it took me so many words to say that, but everything else is fantastic though. And that's just a subjective thing, you know.
Strictly for the love and props like that. Everybody put your hands up high. Keep it moving through the struggle. This that underdog vibe. This ain't nothing but the dope hip hop. The Nord1kone won't stop. Strictly for the love and props like that. Everybody put your hands up high. Keep it moving through the struggle. This that underdog vibe.
Underdog.
So you like an underdog?
Everyone likes an underdog.
Realist rock spot, drop lyrics without poppycock or gimmicks. I just rip rhymes, flip lines, and prove I can get so recognize when you feel that rockin' hip hop, hip hop. What you knew, most rap cats don't know where it started, where it came from. Breaking shit down so it's all understood. Get them something they can feel and rap. Get them something for their heads instead. Yes, y'all.
Nord1kone, mic flip, seize your mind, sucker. Nord1kone, mic flip, seize your mind, suckers. Yeah, hardcore hip hop. Liverpool shit, keep that culture alive. Yeah. Nord1kone, mic flip, seize your mind, sucker.
We like our repeaters at the end of these. It works well. It's a nice way to finish things. Sucker. Yeah, I think with Better Days, the strength of it was you had different singers and different rappers in different parts. You had more color to the arrangement with a lot of different instruments here. We kind of relied on the bass, the guitar motif there. There were some keys, but they were kind of almost a sub-layer in those brighter parts, especially. The drum groove was fantastic. There was variety there. We had some interesting sort of like eighth note, dom, end of each chorus. But the main sort of groove kind of substantiated most of it. And that's okay. We did have breaks from that, of course. Things did float a little bit, but I think, my only comment is what I talked about less of a constant pace with the rapped parts. It's very much like a lot of the rap and hip-hop I listened to, like in the 90s. It does remind me of that, and it works well. I mean, like, it's stylistically cohesive. And not every track has to be, like, super instrumentally colorful and complex either. I'm thinking maybe the reason we had more going on with Better Days is simply because of the fact that we had Elder Sensei on as well, whereas this is Nord1kone the entire time, who again can rap well. To be fair, it's good to have a bit of both. It's nice to occasionally have collaborations and others nice to have sort of solo projects, especially when this track to begin with was involving mic flips, Nord1kone and Seize. It makes me wonder where Seize is going to come in, whether Seize was featured that much in here. Because I remember saying earlier that it's easy to tell who's who. I don't necessarily know their voices, but what I mean is if I was to be like, oh, that's that person, I'd be able to recognize them anywhere else in the album, probably because of the audio quality, but also their own voices and how distinct they are from one another due to actually being intelligent about the collaboration and not having people who are too close to each other, having a bit of contrast there tonally. I think with Low Key and Underdog as a final note thematically, you can probably associate putting them together. You know, someone just quietly trying to do their thing, make their way up, etc. You know, not trying to toot their horn too much, as opposed to someone who feels they need to overcompensate. And so, you know, it's cool that we had the theme represent that in a certain way. And, you know, notwithstanding my comments on like the contrast between this and the other track, you don't really want all the tracks to sound the same anyways. And it can be good to have songs that are a little bit less kind of spicy, just to allow yourself just to sit and sort of accept them, as opposed to being constantly taken in different directions. We've got Path of the Poet, track number 4 for today. Another 5 minute 10 one. Oh, nice. Not that I mind a longer track. And I begin to let a sucker MC diss. Playing MCs when I drop a funky dope rhyme. I go to work, then I leave the microphone broke. Playing MCs when I drop a funky dope rhyme. Now everyone in the show gather around now.
When I was younger, didn't understand the vision. Just began playing with rhythm and words, and my position wasn't set in any condition except for having fun. Let imaginations run, just listening to the drums. Sunsets found me scribing experience to the journal, working through the rough external to understand the internal dialogue. I had to write it out. Tough times we live, no doubt, but poetry helped me mostly run the right route. And from opinions of my friends, I held a golden pen. Came a belief in self that I revisit every now and then. I write rhymes to honor this upbringing and the team that supported me ever since the beginning. And I've always loved battling, releasing that aggression in the form of positivity to teach these MCs lessons. Guess I was born a lethal weapon with the poison tongue. There ain't no stopping this progression of who I become.
So it's about their own personal journeys making their way on it.
And I begin to let a sucker MC diss. Playing MCs when I drop a funky dope rhyme. I go to work, then I leave the microphone broke. Playing MCs when I drop a funky dope rhyme. Now everyone in the show gather around now.
I mean, it's a very somber, like a clarinet or something like that. I mean, it's a very somber saxophone melody there, with the keys in the mid-range, the bass and drums there, kind of similar in a little bit to Underdog Vibe, but I think it's more sort of introspective as per a lot of the stuff we're talking about within the story. We're discussing how we came up, you know, like how we got into it just for fun and stuff like that initially, and it started to sort of like take a turn for the better or the more intense, I suppose. It reflects that reflection.
I go to work, then I leave the microphone broke. Playing MCs when I drop a funky dope rhyme. Now everyone in the show gather around now.
As I got older, I put the whole world on my shoulders and wasn't ready for stresses that come with hard lessons. I remember being broke without the money for the bridge toll. Burned it all down, paid the price, nearly lost my soul. Thankfully, my friends and family held me together, told me to keep my knuckles in head up no matter the weather. And at this time, I rediscovered that I held the pen that writes these paragraphs as moments pass, life cycles new again. Metamorphosis, of course it is the force of this natural evolution, determines directions I'm moving. Got serious, became delirious, and dropped my first tape. 4 records later, and my flavor's deeper in the paint. But still a student, always learning first and foremost. Won't forget my roots, just a kid from the lunar coast. Now at the Golden Gates, I stand with the outsiders. Mike flips and sees, Nord1kone be the sound provider.
Playing MCs when I drop a funky dope rhyme. I go to work, then I leave the microphone broke. Playing MCs.
I like that we have different instrumental sublays.
And I begin to let a sucker MC diss. Playing MCs when I drop a funky dope rhyme. I go to work, then I leave the microphone broke. Playing MCs when I drop a funky dope rhyme. I go to work, then I leave the microphone broke. Playing MCs when I drop a funky dope rhyme. And I begin to let a sucker MC diss. Playing MCs when I drop a funky dope rhyme. I go to work, then I leave the microphone broke. Playing MCs when I drop a funky dope rhyme. So step 2 before proceed with caution.
I couldn't tell you just when it was I became a man. I'm thankful every day for what I have upon these grounds I stand. Now that I'm settling into who just I really am. Records I be peddling on street level to expand. The microphone is just a tool I use to transmit thoughts I've been gathering like storm clouds advancing. Entranced with the rhythm as it relates to life. Thinking about the baby my lady making and how it might remember me. So I'm learning now to stand proud and help a homie up.
Congratulations.
And after I knock him down, set the example and handle skills with priority. Placed on poetry and putting down with mad authority. But the majority will never know the Nord1kone, and that's alright because I write through day and night to overcome all opposition. Defeated when I be dipping my pen into the ink while orchestrates the poet's vision.
Okay, that's interesting.
drop a funky dope rhyme. And I begin to let a sucker MC diss. Playing MCs when I drop a funky dope rhyme. I go to work, then I leave the microphone broke. Playing MCs when I drop a funky dope rhyme. Now everyone in the show gather round now.
Mike flips. Seize. Nord1kone. Path of the poet.
Because I think it's worth noting, right, that rap after all is poetry. And if we're honest, I think the storytelling throughout this album so far has been fantastic. You know, I may have made a comment or two about like the rhythm, but like that's not to sort of take anything away from the way we articulated ourselves, the clever use of vocabulary, the confidence with the expression that we have, and how cool, calm, and collected it was. I mean, like, there's a lot of positives there. And I think that it's also just how interesting it was to have that sort of different vocal take there. We didn't just have Nord1kone do the chorus as well. We've had a different person talk about like hanging up, going to work and stuff like that. It's unpredictable. It makes you wonder what's going on, and that could be very, very powerful because it therefore makes it less predictable. Kind of makes you wonder what's going on. Like, what is this? Like, what time signature is that? What tempo is it? Like, because I have questions. I am not, for instance, sure why... Like, I'm not sure why we're having this outro part here, additional to it. There's a sense of mystery to it. Is that the chance for the listener to display some sort of, like, time to sort of consider their own path? I'm unsure. But we've got the last track for today, Flow State, featuring the I.M.F next. Another collaboration. Or another featured artist. They've got kind of wishy, oscillating synths on the side there in several songs. Kind of massages the eardrums a little bit.
What's up, Nordic? What's going down? Hey, I'm chilling, bro.
Phenomenal groove to that drum kit, man. Lots of energy to it. Hope it reflects the flow of the vocals.
Well, I used to point again across to lift the static off my chest. Used to stand proud, not taking a knee, and I digress. Nonetheless, I'm watching the time and feeling stressed. Can't help but thinking that I'm sinking now below my vest.
Say, homie, chill. Take a deep breath. Get on the vibe that the beat set.
And ever since I lost my brother, my soul never recovered.
It never will, but we can build cause we got each other.
So I.M.F hit me with the prognosis. The pendulum is swinging, I can't sleep like hypnosis.
For sure, I know the feeling, but it's time to seal it up. Put the top back on the pot and simmer down.
So what you're saying is I gotta keep pushing.
Push all your problems into the fifth dimension.
I guess it's all just a test of my resolution. My revolution isn't music, it's the pens moving. This is how we do it cause the show must go on. Hustle records up the sun sets before dawn. When I'm going like a planet, I'ma rotate. Orbiting your speaker, outsiders in the flow state. This is how we do it cause the show must go on. Hustle records up the sun sets before dawn. When I'm going like a planet, I'ma rotate. Orbiting your speaker, outsiders in the flow state.
It's nice to have direct conversation between the two rappers within that chorus section. And then in the verse section we had before, I think Nord1kone and the I.M.F. It's great having a conversation, talking about how they get into that flow state, what they're going through, and how they have to kind of leave it behind and move forward. I think that's really smart. I don't know if we've necessarily had that level of sort of like interaction between the different musicians in this album up until this point. I don't think so, but it's welcome.
But in the speaker, outsiders in the flow state.
Your stories remind me of the 1990s. We was riding bikes, rocking Nikes and white tees. Saturday nights, my moms and pops would fight. Still they try to hide it from me like I'm not too bright. Drew a picture of my family, put it on the wall. Asking God to save the family if these walls should fall. We threw rocks at the sky, blaming God for all the wrong in our life. So Nord1kone wanna ask you, what's wrong in your life?
Well, shit, homie, let me count it down. 7 million nerves and everyone is stressed out.
I understand your pain, I've been through the same. But when you isolate, you only got yourself to blame.
And it's a tough game to play when you know you're gonna lose. But you better keep it moving like you got something to prove.
Can't live your life like you're never gonna die. There's more to life than meets the eye.
This is how we do it, cause the show must
snap.
go on. Hustle records after sunsets before dawn. When I'm gone like your planet, I'ma rotate. Orbit in your speaker, outsiders in the flow state. This is how we do it, cause the show must go on. Hustle records after sunsets before dawn. When I'm gone like your planet, I'ma rotate. Orbit in your speaker, outsiders in the flow state. Flow state, flow state, flow state, flow state, flow state.
Really sweet sub-bass oscillation there. Bit of resonance in there. And we're just delayering back down to the bass and drums. And that's us with Flow State featuring the I.M.F. It's great. I'm stoked with it. I think that there's very little that we really needed to do differently here with this track. It was one of the most natural interactions that I've heard in a song for a while. It was great to have the I.M.F kind of try to sort of like help Nord1kone follow through with their issues of feeling isolated and stuff like that. It was kind of sweet to hear the I.M.F talk about their troubles they had, like when like he was younger and stuff, in a way which is respectful but also very open. I think that this was a very kind of well considered story that could probably help other people to understand that if you isolate yourself, you're only screwing yourself. I think it's a really positive thing to talk about that lyrically. That flow state, kind of doing what you can to move forward, but also making sure not to completely kind of like remove yourself from the equation and put yourself in a position where you can't move forward no matter what you do. I think that the increased tempo of the track there, it helped with like the consonants, like the hard consonants that we had within the rap. They meshed well with that. It was more like the vocals were there to sort of like sync with the percussion in this one. I think that there was a lovely overall tone to the sub bass within this track. It was nice and kind of thick, and it had a great sort of warmth to it. And any other sort of synth or pad works going on there with the level of reverb expressed there with some synths and stuff going around the outside, which is charming. This is probably one of my favorite tracks off of the album, if not the favorite. And welcome to the conclusion of my review of this album. This album from Max, Mike Flips, and Nord1kone and Seize, titled Life Cycles. Now, what do I think this album was about? I think it was these musicians talking about life, their various experiences as rappers, their experiences with becoming rappers and musicians, like growing up in their childhoods and coping with life and how to fix them and their various trials and tribulations, but also looking forward in tracks like For Better Days, for example, like looking forward to when things improve and working towards that. The Underdog Vibe, understanding that maybe like there's a lot of competition, well, there's not maybe, there is a lot of phenomenal like competition in the music industry, but we're trying to come at it with a sense of authenticity, and we're not trying to sort of like over engineer it, with Path of the Poet being more sort of true to the kind of idea and concept of like the direction needed to go in, not only as musicians but also as storytellers and stuff like that, but also just what their life will be as a poet, in the business of life, being the introduction to the album as a whole. I mean, I know I'm not doing this in order, these are just what the tracks that come to mind. I just think that Business of Life was a wonderful introduction with the various bits of, like, it clearly instantiates instantly that they understand how to sort of produce music. The sort of story voiceovers were so compelling. It sounded like you were flipping through channels on a television. And then we had that kind of intimation of, how human beings go for a life cycle just like everyone else. And the rest of the tracks being about those life cycles, I presume including Life Cycles track number 4. But look, outside of what this track is about, album is about, I think that the vocal performances were absolutely tremendous, not just from Nord1kone, who I understand was on a lot of the tracks, but also Elder Sensei and the I.M.F. It was clear to see. I'm not sure who else was rapping on this, if Seize was also doing stuff on this, or Mike Flips, because there were a few different voices present within this, so it wouldn't surprise me if we had more than one sort of like person involved, like with Mike Flips and Nord1kone and Seize involved. But I think that any performances we had from the vocalists were top tier. The rap flow was eloquent, it was well thought out and well told. We had a cool, calm demeanor to it. We never really tried to attack it from too sort of personal an angle. It seemed like believable, but we never got too heavy into it. It never became too sort of like negatively or positively overwhelming. It was more about serving the needs of the listener for it to be relatively palatable without putting the weight burden of the emotional weight on them. The rhythms and various phrasings we had here were great. They were nice and organic. I know I talked potentially in one of the tracks, I'm not sure which one it is, I think it might have been Underdog Vibe, about maybe needing to have less of a constant sort of movement of words and syllables coming through to allow there to be more space, not only to be able to appreciate the backing, but I spoke about that at that point in the review. But it's just, aside of that though, I think we phrased things really well, clearly confident and experienced on the microphone, no weak performances whatsoever. It was really great to listen to. It did remind me a lot of like the hip hop and rap and boom bap that I kind of heard back when I was growing up as a very, very young kid in the 90s. It does make me nostalgic for how music and things were back then. Not that I can necessarily relate to everything they were talking about, but and I think that if it makes you feel nostalgic, that by virtue is a success because it's made you emotionally relate to the music. And if that's from the stories alone, as well as just the general sort of sense of care and flow state, they handled the tough conversations there so classily. I think that Better Days was also good for them talking about their own individual like journeys and how they want to get to better days and all the hustling and grinding they need to do. But yeah, that again, flow state was my favorite. The tracks were typically about 3 to 5 minutes. We had The Business of Life, which was a shorter intro, but that was by virtue of an intro. I don't think it needed to be any longer than that. We had so much that came into The Business of Life with the various different voiceovers, the various instruments involved, different setups and styles there that I don't think we needed more from that. We predominantly had verse chorus phrasings there. We had our hooks. They were catchy, they were compelling, they were engaging. There were no weak hooks. The verses had as way of kind of voice, the vocals were the focal point there for the most part. We didn't necessarily feel the need to sort of show too much of what was going on with the bass parts. I mean, the drums and the bass were apparent and they were missed when they weren't there, and they were appreciated when they were. There were guitar parts and key parts and synth parts, and there were some saxophone bits there, as well as some like woodwinds potentially, clarinets, etc. And there was a lot to enjoy there. There was also turntablism and scratching and chopping of the various vocal parts and Better Days and The Business of Life, which I think was wonderful. I kind of missed that as we went further on into the album, but I think at the same time, if you have too much of a good thing, it can be too much. So I think that sort of restraint there was made a lot of sense, and I'm stoked with the fact that we had it there at all. Clearly, really good DJ. Really, it's that the vinyl was served well there. And I think if you think about the early 90s aesthetic with hip hop and rap, it makes a lot of sense. I think that's also part of why I felt nostalgic listening to it. It's kind of a really wild thing to be able to make an album in 2023 that makes it sound like an album in the early 90s, and that's testament not only to the production but also the music theory, the way things were composed and layered there instrumentally. I'm not sure how much of this they recorded versus how much they sampled. I don't particularly mind either way. It's not a massive issue. It'd be cool if they recorded individual parts from the various instruments. But I could see in the album art they use like a sampler and stuff like that, which is fine. It sounds great. I don't mind sampling at all, don't get me wrong. I think that they could manipulate any track the way they wanted to. They clearly know what they're doing. And it sounded very authentic to the genre, especially in the time period that we're talking about. The transitions between sections were seamless. A few of the instrumental elements that I appreciated in particular were the drums, the variation with the different grooves, 8th and 16th notes, snare, kick patterns. There were some cymbal parts with some interesting sort of fill bits as well. The bass lines were nice and articulate. I keep saying articulate. They suited the chord progressions well. We didn't have a lot of huge changes with the different chord progressions, though. There's a bit of modulation in the business of life harmonically with the root notes and the patterns there. Oh, right. And the Underdog Vibe. Or was it Better Days? Better Days. One of them had like a rolling bass line that was kind of going between chromatics and then switching to a low note and then following that sequence there in its own shape. I think that was really clever. There were some interesting bass lines in there. The saxophone was another one of my favorites. I think that when it had those solo lead passages there as cool responses to the vocals, or such as in Path of the Poet, it was kind of there, kind of hanging around as like a lingering ether with what we were talking about. Oh, it could be, yeah, it was definitely Path of the Poet. Definitely Path of the Poet I was talking about. Yeah, I think that the saxophone is such a moody instrument and gives such a sense of weight there, and kind of also reminds me of a lot of lo-fi hip-hop. I think that that's a strength here that we have there, where a lot of the lo-fi hip-hop we have nowadays kind of looks back to music from this era within the genre, so I think that that's actually kind of serendipitous. I think for the most part, the themes that we had with these different tracks sounded relatively low key. They were never hugely energetic. They were always meant to kind of get you sitting there, kind of nodding your head, grooving to it, accepting it silently. Maybe you would like kind of pump yourself to it, but pump yourself up to it. But like, there were no tracks in this song that really fired me up, and I think that was by design. It wasn't meant to be super kind of like dopamine injecting or anything like that. It was meant to be something you could kind of appreciate and kind of respect, not only for the way it was written, not only for the way that it was rapped, but because of through how it was all put together. I think stylistically the various tracks have a lot of elements which strung them together really effectively. It wasn't just that we had similar vocalists going over top of it and similar themes. It was also partly the studio production, recording, mixing, and mastering, but it was also just the fact that we reliably had that kind of tone of delivery across the board, and I think it was very successful because of that. Without a note out of place, again, the studio recording, mixing, and mastering, the vocals were nice and present in the mix. The various instruments were recorded very effectively. There was interesting filtering of some frequencies within the tracks with the various like synth parts or whatever. There was a huge amount of like size to the scope of the stereo field, like we had things right on the sides. They're kind of oscillating there in some tracks in their introductions and stuff like that. We had, like in The Business of Life, the vocals kind of came like that way. It was really great in regards to automation there. It was really well thought out. Like messing with the position of things in the stereo field and kind of moving them like that can just be it can turn a good thing into a great thing, because it just seems like it's alive, more so alive than it already was. And especially in the first track of an album, you've got to kind of pull out all the stops a lot of the time to get the person kind of sucked in so they listen to more, because you really have that 30 seconds, and if you don't get them in, and if they're new and they're not entirely familiar, you might be out of luck. But I think it kept a very authentic tone to a lot of instruments from that time period, so I do think there was a fair bit of sampling going on to those instruments from back in the 90s and around that period. I think that leaving them in their original state without trying to sort of pretty them up or sort of make them more presentable in the 2020s like era level of production there, where things are I think hip-hop and rap has changed a lot over the last 30 years. But I like the fact that we stayed true to our origins and our inspirations, and I think that with the leveling being really on point, things are nicely leveled within the mix, with there being no resonant frequencies. And I mean, if there were slight ones like with the sub bass, it was done on purpose in a way that made sense with the tone of it, and it was welcome because of that. With there being dynamic range and things not being the same loudness all the time, with various little repeaters on notes and stuff like that, showing we understand our effects change as well as how to voice ourselves and how to play things. It's just the fact that it was nice and low without pumping. So, the bus compression limiting is handled well. And I mean, effectively, this is my review of this album titled Life Cycles from Mike Flips, Nord1kone and Seize. And hopefully you enjoyed it. If you did, please go show them some love via their various social medias and a Spotify page, and stay cool and stay safe. And please remember to support your local musicians and artists at this point in time, as they help more than ever thought of crazy stuff going on in the world. And I'll catch you in the next review. Spiderhands Out.